I'm Rick from Plymouth Cuda Cars. We're back on video 2 on this 70 Cuda. As you could see from the last video, we got everything mounted on the jig. I haven't even swept the floor at this point because I know on today's video, we're gonna make a huge mess. The idea is we're gonna cut out all the rust on this car. We're going to see what's left and come up with a parts inventory on anything that we're missing. I'm sure, even though I said it, that this car is pretty obvious we're replacing most of the metal, I'm sure there's going to be some surprises. To just sum it up, we're going to start with the external skins. We're going to get the trunk and the doors unbolted first and put them off on the side. We're also going to take the skins off them. Once we get down to that, we're going to just start assessing what we got and just take it one step at a time, one piece at a time, and try to make a method to this madness. You know, we don't want to just blow the whole car apart. I do know most of the back of this car is going to be removed. If you haven't seen the last video, please go back and check it out. We got a full rear bottom floor clip in this thing with the frame rails and the rear seat pan and trunk pan and everything. So at that point, to save some time, we are going to probably cut off the back of the clip. So stay tuned on this video. We're gonna get to cutting it. You can see the front end of this car. A lot has already been removed. So we are gonna leave, I think, we're gonna see how it goes, some pieces up here, or I'll make a bar piece across here to just make sure everything holds. The idea is you see how stiff the car is right now on the jig. You can't move it. For the most part, we want the car not to be swaying, moving, or getting crooked. We're all good on the bottom. Everything's welded in our key points, so I'm not worried about that. It's just the top we got to make sure isn't going to bow in or out. So stay tuned. Let's get to cutting on this car, and we'll come back for a final thought and a walk around on it. So like I was saying earlier, the first thing we're going to do is take off the bolt-on parts. The trunk is actually looking like it's in really good shape, so what we'll do, that will automatically go to the side. Nothing will be done on it, and we'll get it ready for blasting. We'll show you in the next video how we go about doing that. As for taking apart the doors, I've talked to the owner and we've discussed that the doors, we are going to cut the skins off on these doors. There is some rust in the lower corners of them, so at this point, everything else on the external car is going to be removed. Why not just remove the skins, even if they have to be repaired, and then we'll make sure we don't find any more hidden rust on this car. We're going to go ahead and set the doors off on the side and get to them later in the video. As of right now, I want to focus on the main Cuda body itself. What we're going to end up doing, we're going to use a cutoff wheel, and I'm going to go around the outside of all the exterior panels. I'm going to try to make sure we don't cut in anywhere that we got to pop rosette welds or anything else like this. So you could see I'm going over the drip rails. We're also going to assess the drip rails. As of right now, we might keep the drip rails, but we're not going to know until we remove the roof. The reason we're going to use a cutoff wheel, I've said it in other videos, is to me it's a less intrusive of all the, you know, cutoff things that we can do on this car. You're going to see we're going to use an air chisel to cut off later. We will use a plasma, but for me right now, this is the most efficient. I mean, it goes through some cutoff wheels, but we're not, and I can control the depth of it. So you can see we're not going in there and hurting in the structure. I switched to the air hammer right here because everything was so rotted away. The cutoff wheel was kind of, you know, going in and out, and it was hard to get there. So to me, like I said, there's multiple ways to do this process. The air hammer, I sharpened it up, and you can see we just finished that area in the channel. Now that we have the roof skin off the car, we're going to go ahead and just go around the perimeter of the quarter panels. This is just the easiest, same thing as the quarter skin, to just get the panel off the car, and then we'll come back and address everything that was actually holding the panel on. The bottom of these quarter panels, you'll see it when we flip them over a little bit later. It's all fiberglass. There's a bunch of filler in the bottom. You can actually see it coming off the cutoff wheel, and then there's pop rivet little sheet metal patches in there. So it's kind of a pain in the butt to be working with this, and then this is another reason why the cutoff wheel is really the only tool that I think is the best for this job. You know, the plasma won't work with all the filler in there. There's more stuff that can catch on fire. The air chisel, it just doesn't seem to get in there when you have all these little patches on top of patches. So we'll just get the panels off, get them off clean, in the sense that we just want to focus on what we're doing and what we're cutting. Again, we need to make sure we're not cutting anything we need underneath. There's a bunch of brackets in these cars. There's a bunch of areas, mounting areas, that the factory uses spot welds on. And you have to think about it. This car is real easy in the sense that we're really removing everything. But if you're keeping, like for instance, what we're cutting right now, this deck filler panel, you want to make sure you cut around that. Same thing with the trunk gutters. If the trunk gutters were good in this car, well, we would have to cut the quarter panel in a different area, keeping the trunk gutters and tail panel. Like I said, this car, we are going to try to save the tail panel. It looks like it's in good shape. So what I'm focusing on, I'm focusing all my cuts around separating the tail panel, and of course with this deck filler panel we're doing right now, I'm cutting around the trunk hinges because they are good. So we're going to keep them in that support bracket. So the idea is you're going to leave the parts on the tail panel, and we'll come back through later down the road and I'll separate all those pieces before blasting at a later date on the trunk panel, so I can slowly take it apart versus trying to take it apart on the car, where we have more of a chance of doing damage to these panels. The problem with these panels, and it's not a huge issue, but I mean, they were never designed to be removed once they're spot welded on from the factory. So they're really getting them off is a little bit of a science. I mean, it looks easy, you know, this video is in time lapse and it just flies through, but we fight a lot of this stuff. And actually, like cutting off the skins, this is the easiest part. And like I was saying, you could see the patches in there. The tedious part on the whole cut down of the car really is coming back through and grinding off all the areas that are spot welded that then have to be removed. You could see on this tail panel even how much of this we're just kind of rough cutting, and all those parts are going to have to be put on a stand and be slowly dissected from this tail panel, all those spot welds, while saving the tail panel. So that is the challenging part, and the stuff I'm going to save you on this video. We'll show a little bit of some of the removal, just so you know, you see the idea. But as far as removing everything off this tail panel, it's the same process. Drilling out spot welds, taking a grinder, and just, you know, removing stuff slowly without hurting parts. You can see with the tail panel, it was easy for me to use the air chisel to just come in there underneath where the trunk is destroyed. Again, ripped it right across, and the latch wasn't even held on to the trunk. It was so rusted. So the tail panel's off. I believe that's going to be salvageable. So there's one original part going back on the car. Right now, I'm going to come back through and I'm going to remove the trunk hinges. I'm cutting around them on the plasma cutter. I like to take the parts I'm saving first in that area, just so I don't accidentally cut something, hurt something. So like I said, right here, I already drilled out the spot welds going into the package tray area. And you might want to say, well, okay, why'd you remove these? They were on the car. Honestly, we got to put that whole back section in one piece. These have to go. They're in the way. So again, we'll come back through, remove the wheelhouse off the bottom of them down the road, and they're out of the way. We don't have to worry about cutting them, damaging them in the process. I'll sandblast them separate and epoxy them separate and get them prepped separate. And then like the build, when we go to put this car back together, we'll just assemble them as brand new pieces, and they'll look brand new when they're done. We'll get in everywhere. So I think that's the easiest route to go. So right now that those are out, we're going to take, like I said, the plasma cutter. And the reason I'm using the plasma cutter right now, and I've said it in earlier in the video, is now I'm not worried about damaging anything. This whole back half of the car, from the package tray and those upper inner wheelhouse supports on the inner structure, all that stuff is junk down below on this car. Well, everything's going to be brand new, so we're going to just go ahead and cut the whole back section off this car. There's no sense, now that everything's jigged up on the bottom, in trying to save frame rails or anything like that. We know where they're going to go. Let's just remove it all one piece, save the owner some time, save me some time, and just get it outside. You could see how rusted this thing is. I mean, there's just nothing left of this thing. I said on the last video, even when we were trying to put this thing on the frame table and we were jacking it up, the jack was going right through to one of the bottom of the frame rail. So that's how rotted away this thing is. So looking at this car and addressing it, the drip rails are not going to be saved. The other side of this thing is just really rusted out. This side has rust underneath it, and the drip rails, honestly, at this point, by the time we try to dissect the roof out of it, it's really hard to get that without blowing through the bottom of the drip rails with a grinder. You've probably seen me do it if you watch my channel and other videos, and it's possible. It just takes a lot more time. With the damage on the other side, it's not even worth trying to do that. We'll just, like I said, take the air chisel. The metal underneath is pretty solid, so we could just pop that up and just take the drip rails off, and then we'll put the new drip rails on and just make sure they're right in line with the new roof. That'll be down the road, but we'll add that part to the list. It was something we weren't expecting, but that's part of this game. So as I was saying about the drip rails, here is the damage on the other side. This was where we cut our roof skin off, and you could just see even the inner structure on these panels, and even underneath on the wheelhouse support brace, it's just all rusted out. So this side is the common area that the E-bodies rust. We're going to go ahead and just remove those pieces also, and just while we're here, we're going to replace them. Again, underneath this inner support structure is all bare metal. How far do you want to take your E-body to make it, you know, sealed up, last a lifetime? And I get it. This stuff isn't exposed to the outer elements, but humidity gets in here and you can really see, I mean, this damage, even though it's not exposed to the outer elements, how bad it really is on this car. So just something to think about on your car when you're doing this. At what point do we stop? I mean, this point, we know these are rotted away. This is the right thing to do. These patches are made by AMD. It's not that much more. So I think this is the best way to go. And like I said, 2 more surprises on this cut down. I also want to point out, as I'm cutting down this car, I'm usually working my way from the top down. Now, I did cut the whole back of the car out for ease of just getting in and around the area. But the reason I'm doing this, you could see, I still have the deck filler support braces going down to the floor. The inner wheel houses are kind of still on there. And so I can really hammer on this roof, push, pry, you know, getting these parts off with the air chisel and everything. It is rough on these parts. So worrying about bending it, this car's still really solid with all the wheelhouses. So if you're cutting one of these cars down, that might be something to think of. Start from the top, work your way down, because our jig pieces are on the bottom. So we're not really worried about the bottom bending on the parts that we're going to keep. And if you see something moving on the bottom, it's easier to add a part off the jig. Saying that, I'm not saying you can't add support braces going from the jig up to the top. I've done it before on cars that are really weak, and we'll see how this one goes. We might have to add some more support pieces if the car gets too weak or moves around too much. So saying that, we are done with the whole roof and most of the teardown. I gotta come back through the belt sander and everything, like I said, and clean up all the little pieces and straggling, you know, welds are held in there. But we can go ahead now and we can cut out the rest of our wheelhouses. So you can see right now I'm cutting around the brackets coming down. Again, this is going to be the same process as removing the outer skins, that we want to cut around all the supports first. Now this wheelhouse, I'm having some trouble with my plasma cutter because this thing's caked through with at least 1/4 inch. Some areas are 1/2 inch of this, you know, the undercoat. You know, to me, when you see this much undercoat, obviously someone already knew this car was junk. We could see from the outer quarter panels, they knew the patches weren't that good, and they're just trying to cover everything up. Now that both the wheelhouses are out, we're going to do the same thing on the back, and we're going to do it in this front floor rear seat pan section. We're going to just remove the whole thing. We're cutting right across. We're kind of doing this in a structured manner because, you know, there is the inner frame rails in here. So what we're going to end up doing, we got to make sure we save the torque boxes. So we're going to cut around those areas, and there's a bunch of supports going to the rocker panels over here. So we're going to try to just cut the floor around those supports, and then we're going to cut the frame rails underneath behind all those support brackets. And you can see right now it just lifts out. The 2 frame rails were the only thing there, and then right there is where all the rocker supports start. Now that we got most of the back of this car done, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to start working the front of it now. Again, I told you I like to work my way from the top down, so we are working on the back. Let's start on the top now in the front on the parts that we got to cut down. So we're going to go ahead and remove the cowl panel. Now, saying that, I haven't decided on the A-pillars. The A-pillars are really rusted. I need to call the owner, and we need to make a decision on that down the road. Like I said, I need to also make sure the patches are in stock. That's something else. So right now, I probably am going to remove the A-pillars, but one, we need to make sure we have the parts and we can get them, and then the owner's willing to go this route. So that's why we are going to skip the A-pillars, and we'll come back to that. But right now, we got the upper cowl off. We are going to now remove the firewall. Same thing, I'm just going between cutoff wheel, air chisel, and the plasma cutter to whatever's easiest. And up here, same thing that I was saying earlier in the back. There's nothing that we're really saving. There's nothing we're worried about. There's really nothing here left. You could see these firewalls and the cowl panels. There's another spot for the E-bodies. Very few of them. I only think I've messed with a couple of them, that even those couple that we need, they're in really good shape, they usually need patches in this area. So if you have an E-body, kind of plan on removing both these pieces. They are an item that rust out and water collects in them, and they just really weren't sealed up properly and had the proper protection under there. So with the floor pan, yes, most everything except the inner rockers are going to be cut out of this area. Instead of just ripping everything right apart, I'm still going to try to dissect this floor pan in more of an organized fashion. I think it just makes it easier, just in case we need anything else off the floor pan. Usually we don't, but we could come back and we can get it. And then I know I'm not hurting the torque boxes underneath. And again, we'll even address how bad they are. They might have to be replaced anyway. But you could see I'm cutting down the torsion bar support. We're going to just remove this front floor pan section. Now the torsion bar support I know has to come out in the car. If you saw the last video, you could see there's holes in it on both sides. It's not really doing anything. But what I'm going to end up doing first, I'm going to, now that we got that front section removed, I'm actually going to remove the automatic shifter, center console, bracket, and everything. We might have to save some of these. You might have to come back in the car. And I believe the owner's going with a 4-speed conversion, but here we go. We have a set of brackets for if the owner wants to take them or for measurements on another project. So I'll put that in a pile where we get to keep, and we're going to go ahead, now that that's out and the whole center floor support, we could take one side of the floor out at a time. To me, these floor pans work a lot better if you take the center support out of them and then you kind of just yank down the middle. And like I said, we're also going around that whole rocker torque box assembly in the back. There's a big support area around there, so we're going to just go around that, and you're going to see we're going to come back with the air chisel and get that later. So you can see right there, I cut right in front of the torque box, and that section of the floor is removed. We have the front frame rail section still on the car too. That's something else we're going to have to address. Right now, I'm going to just come back with the air chisel and just quickly remove all the extra pieces on this area. Now, saying that, this is an easier area to use the air chisel without damaging the inner rockers. The reason being, the inner rockers are so thick, so you can be really aggressive on using the air chisel and just popping through, ripping up spot welds when your metal behind it, when one metal is, like I said, thinner gauge than the other. The thinner gauge will usually just get destroyed. But if you have two pieces of metal that are 18 gauge, like around the window channels, you can't really just go hammering this thing left and right. Most of the time, both metals will start, splitting. Either one will or the other will. So if you're trying to save one, it's not going to work. So just be aware that's an area you'll have to drill out spot welds, where most of the time around these inner rockers, it might pop and leave a little hole that we could come back through and just weld up. Not a huge deal, but it's a time saver. So right now, you could see I exposed the inner rocker, torque box, shackle bracing area. So that we'll be able to get with a plasma cutter and start removing, rough cutting that, and then coming back through with a grinder. Honestly, getting these big frame rail pieces, the structure of the bottom of the car, is some of the most time consuming thing that you can do. And especially when you add the torque boxes into them, because we're trying to save the torque boxes. So really got to take in small sections and just you got to really be precise. To really show you how bad this car was, this is actually the leaf spring support brace completely rusted through. So could you imagine trying to put power to this thing or trying to flip this car and sell it? I mean, this whole area, even the torque boxes, I had to brace up and jig up both the torque boxes in the rear that we're saving because they just have no support in them. Now, I don't think they're rusted through, but this will work out really good because there'll be a frame rail area that we could just sit right on the torque boxes and another jig point. Once we go ahead and we're done with that, I'm going to go ahead and remove the other side floor, exposing this area. You can see I've already jigged the torque box on this side, knowing from the other side. Once we're done with that, I'm going to go ahead and remove the front torsion bar support, and you can see there's a giant hole on the inner rocker right there, and there's one on the other side. We'll go ahead and just make a patch for that, and we'll be able to get into the rocker and look at that even better. We're going to go ahead and dissect the front torque box, saying that after looking at the front torque boxes now exposed from the top looking down, these front torque boxes aren't worth saving. We're going to go ahead and we're going to find an aftermarket set, either one that looks completely factory or one of the aftermarket ones that is close enough, and we're going to go ahead and install them in this area. Right now, we're going to leave these front torque boxes on, again, kind of as a jig point for our frame rail piece. So the first thing what I'd like to do on the front is be able to put the torque boxes in. As you can see, I made the front jig pieces earlier in the last video. So that will enable us put these front torque boxes on and set the frame rails just like the rear. So now the car is completely ground out with all the extra pieces removed. You could see from the inner rockers, everything else. I went through the whole car. You could see all the bare metal grind spots. So mostly everything's prepped to be sandblasted at this point. I just got to remove a couple more pieces. One of them, after talking with the owner, is going to be these A-pillars. So you can see right now I'm just taking the belt sander out because this is that really thick structural metal, and I'm just taking the belt sander and I'm digging out the spot welds. I'm going both ways, and I'm trying to find the spot welds first because these pieces are so rusted. It was the same thing with the torsion bar support and the rear frame rail cross members where the leaf springs bolt in, that when everything's that rusted, you can't even find the spot welds because all the pits start looking like a spot weld. So I'm kind of just feeling around. I am taking the drill and going on the inner part of the A-pillar where I know we're going to keep it. So the first thing I want to do after I get the spot welds out, or just, again, same thing what I did in the other one, is do a cut around the actual piece I'm taking out. That will take most of the structure out. Once we get most of the structure out of that piece, I can come back with the air chisel and just start hammering through the little bit of structure what's left. You can see most of the piece will just pop right up. The thicker metal right here, you can see I missed a spot weld here or there, will fight us a little bit, but then you could see in a minute I'm going to grab the belt sander and just come in on one spot weld now that I found out where I missed it, and just hit it with the belt sander, pull that last spot weld holding it off, and you see it falls right off. So once we end up doing this, we're going to clean up the rest of the whatever's left in that spot weld, the A-pillar, to match the rest of the car. We'll run right up the A-pillar, and those things will be good to go and ready for sandblasting. Now that for the most part everything's removed on the car itself, we're going to turn our attention to the doors. We're going to, same thing as we did on the A-pillars, I'm going to use the belt sander. You could use the spot weld cutter and all that on these doors. I just think it's easier to go back through here, grind out the spot welds at the angle it's in, and then you don't have any cleanup to do. You don't got any welding to do. Also, be aware you can remove this bracket that the doors are held on. I have a video that I've done on a 73 Challenger where we skin a Challenger door, which is going to be similar to the Cuda in a sense, but some of the Dynacorn panels come with that bracket on the inside of the door that AMD ones don't. So just be aware, same thing with the A-pillars that we did. Be aware of what you're cutting off and what the part actually replaces, so you're not doing more work or you cut too much off and then realize you need something. Also, this is very important, and this whole car is that way. I did not throw any one of these parts that I cut off this car out at this point. They're all sitting deep in the woods, hidden, where I can go back through and grab some brackets and everything else. So on this last door, I didn't explain in the second video, but you could see I'm taking a flap disc and I'm running around the edges of the door. As I'm grinding the edges, you could actually see the door split from the fold where it folds over itself and relieves the inner structure of the door. So that's the easiest way to take this door apart. And then what I'll do, I'll come back through with the air chisel and just get the single side spot welds, pop them up, and then once we end up doing that, you could see we could just fold the door right over. All right, so we're going to wrap the video up on the 70 Cuda. As you can see, there's not much left to this car. We kind of knew that starting out. I don't think that was a big surprise to the owner. I sent him pictures of it before the video, and we went over a couple things. Like I said, we talked about the A-pillars that I showed you, that we cut them off. We decided to remove the door skins. I think that was the right call. I mean, the door skins weren't horrible, but you could see down here on this door in this corner, it's all rusted out. All the channels rusted here, and on the other one in a little bit, I'll show you, it has all like the surface rust, just like the rest of the car. So the concept of our frame jig, you could see it much better now that the car's pulled off. That this is what I was talking about the opening video. This is welded in 2 inches further than where it was on the Challenger. Same thing with this support back here. So this will be the shock cross tower. And remember, we have that whole big piece. It's really hard right now not to sit there and just throw that whole piece in the car and see how it fits. I am gonna wait and do it one time just so we don't mess up anything. You know, that panel's already prepped, and you know, like I said, we'll fix it and we'll adjust it where it goes. This does look like an overwhelming project. Something like this, I personally like to take one step at a time. So like I said, the first step was getting it on the table, making everything level, making our points. We want to spend the time on a car this bad, making our pickup points and make sure they're right, because on the assembly phase, it's going to make things so much easier. With this, I went through, I straightened out all the metal, I drilled out the rest of the holes on our spot welds up here and a lot of inner structure. We'll come back through and we'll weld a lot of these areas that, you know, obviously the quarter panel will go down here, and we'll probably spot weld most of this quarter panel. So saying that, after the sandblast, we'll come back through, we'll see what metal is rusted out, we'll come back through, fix it, grind it, make everything look clean. Same thing, we're gonna have to do some patching here. And I don't want to go ahead, I could start patching the car right now, but the reason is I could spend a bunch of time patching this panel for some reason, and I don't think this would happen, but it's happened on other things with firewalls, things like that, and we blast it, and then all of a sudden we start seeing daylight, and then now we have to buy this part. Well, we spent 2 hours patching down here. Well, now this whole thing needs to be replaced, so you're just doing the work twice. So that's something we're not trying to look to do. You could see the torque boxes in the rear, they're salvageable. The inner rockers, they have some holes in them, they'll have to be fixed, they're rusted out. Looking at the front torque boxes, they're just, like I said, they're not worth saving. They're rusted out, they're rotted, and we are going to replace them, use our jig points as the pickup. There's like I said, we did remove the A-pillar post. I left this upper brace on the upper cowl across. And remember what I said about this car, we want structure in it. I can move it a little bit, but I could put a lot of my weight and the car's still coming back. We're not worried about it bending and everything. We'll take some cross measurements when it's done to make sure everything's straight. But if you are worried about and you're doing this and you come to this far, there's nothing you say you can't drop a bar down from there to the rocker, you know, there to somewhere else, you know, down here. I've done down to these areas. If we end up cutting the rockers, a lot of times I'll put a bar back down here and go right to the frame jig and hold the wheelhouse in and then put the rockers in first on a lot of these. So that's what I was saying on the first video. A lot of these frame jigs and everything they're generic for the car, and I have certain pickup points, like I said, the K-member mount in front that I use for the car, and it makes life easier. But depending on what the car needs, you're gonna have to customize it, and the job is always slightly different. If this car really needed rockers, we'd have to do a little bit different of a job here. But like I said, I think the rockers, there is some damage down here and on the other side that we will have to repair and patch up. But talking to owner, we decide that the rockers in general, before sandblast, like I said, for some reason, if something different changes, changes after sandblast, but right now, before sandblast, I don't think there's any surprises down here. I think they're gonna blast out okay, and we're gonna just fix and repair them. These side cowl pieces, you see I left them on. They are rotted away. You can look on this side of the cowl panel, on the back side of this, and you can see there's nothing there. It's rotted out up here. That will have to be patched. And then this whole piece from down here to inside, it's just not worth repairing. So the reason I left it on is we're gonna blast this area and not worry about this, but I'm using it as a reference point. There's no real reason we have to cut it off right now. I'll blast the inside of it and get it the best I can. And then when I get these pieces, this will be one of the first pieces I do. We'll measure off here. I'll make sure the distance is the same. We'll put screws in before we go ahead and weld it and get everything prepped. You'll see, I'm gonna show all this. And then we'll put our firewall and cowl on and make sure everything works there. The upper A-pillar will be one of the first pieces that goes in. Also, we'll butt weld a certain area up here because there's no sense in pulling up these two brackets. But this is nice because we'll be able to get in here, blast, everything will be done. The door, this is what I was saying. So we have a factory door, and you can see, I mean, there's just no primer on any of this stuff. So it's all gonna be surface rusted. So really, that's the same thing with this whole upper area. Every one of these E-bodies I've seen, there's just no primer, paint, nothing up here. It's bare metal. We could see it behind all the panels. So of course these cars are gonna rust. They weren't made to last 50, they weren't made to last 10 years. So we've come to the end of life on them. So realistically, I think, my personal opinion, sometimes if you just want that perfect car to know that the suspension's not rotted out, the frame points and everything else, and it's not a flipper car, sometimes it's better just to buy the worst of the worst. And then you just rip it apart and do it one time. If you can find someone that can do it, if you can do it and you spend the time, you spend the money one time, you're not fighting this car down the road. You start with a good base, and then like I said, you don't need the biggest motor. You can upgrade that stuff down the road. What you really can't upgrade down the road is the inner structure once there's paint on the car. Once the motor's in and it's driving, you don't want to rip a roof off the car because something inside here is bothering you, or this corner of the quarter panel keeps cracking because the whole car's flexing because it's so rusted out. So that's just a random opinion on it. Hopefully you enjoyed this cut down video. I'm gonna say on this video, this is one car that was already not roadworthy and we definitely didn't destroy. We're kind of taking it right from what probably came out of a junkyard at one point, you know, sitting in a field somewhere, rotting away, and we're gonna put it back on the road. So stay tuned. I'm excited about this build. We're trying some new parts. Like I said, if you haven't seen it, go back to the first video and check it out. You know, it's gonna be a learning curve for me on those larger parts. The Dynacorn, they also make a whole side to like a Challenger. I think they make a Cuda too. If not, AMD sells all these parts. A Cuda's an awesome car to restore because there's so many aftermarket parts that we're able to bring these cars back from, I mean, at this point you could see almost nothing. So stay tuned for this build. We got some other cars in the shop. If you don't like the Mopars, we got a GM car coming up next in the line. It's already in the shop and we're ready to start working on it. So stay tuned for that. I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars. Please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out. And I'll see you on the next video. Take care.